Welcome to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jacob Acquire. We have a lot to get into today, but before we get into all of the recent information and news that broke with the trade deadline at 4 p.m. today, we are reformatting how we do our podcast. So we're going to do a recap episode every Tuesday, and then we'll do a kind of game preview for the week on Thursday. And we'll do Purrfect Takes on both. We're going to kind of do a spin on each one, and we'll kind of get into that when we get to that section. But for now, let's jump into the Panthers-Saints game. For the fourth time ever during the history of this podcast, we get to talk about a win. And the Panthers pulled off a 23-22 upset at home. Bryce Young, he looked good. He looked exactly like the quarterback a lot of fans wanted him to be this year. But an interesting note before we get into the details, we became the first team ever in the Super Bowl era to win by gaining less than 250 yards, having 0 takeaways, and allowing 425 yards. So by no means, when you look at some of the advanced metrics or even success rate, did we necessarily win this game. It just came down to a couple lucky bounces that did fall our way.
Yeah, winners win. What can I say? And there is no team that I would like more to have defeated for our first home win of the season, Bryce's first win, then the New Orleans Saints, maybe the Falcons. It's a little bit of equal hatred for both organizations. It was a good game. First off, I think the Saints got off to a really good start, right? They drove down the field 2 times, but settled for field goals because their offense inside the red zone sputtered. Derek Carr was not accurate on the day. He was dirting balls in front of Alvin Kamara, in front of Taysom Hill. And it was our defense locking up what it needed to, like in the red zone and late in the game in the fourth quarter. And our offense, when we were given NFL plays, like downfield plays, like executing and working on those, that's what led to the win. But there were a lot of things that I would like to see cleaned up before we go into Germany next week when we have the early game at 9:30 on Sunday. But you got to be happy with the win, right? First of all, it was in our black jerseys, not our white ones that we lose every single game in. It was a cool uniform matchup. We were black and silver. They were white and gold. We came away with the win there. But what I liked the most, aside from Bryce playing well, was all of the rookies contributed a ton in this game. JT Sanders, career game. I don't think we could win without him. Number one, getting like the 50-yard hurdle and truck rumble down the sideline. The play where Bryce was getting like hammered and he threw it up to him along the left sideline for a jump ball. And he drew a key defensive pass interference on the last scoring drive. So excellent game. Xavier Legette, another touchdown. He's tied for second, actually, or I guess tied for third because 2 people are tied for first in rookie touchdowns this year. Only Marvin Harrison Jr. and Brian Thomas Jr. have more receiving touchdowns for rookies this year. It's an interesting note. Jalen Coker, he didn't have a ton of catches in this game, but he had really good chain-moving catches, and he almost scored. He stepped out on like the 3-yard line on a third down, so yeah, he got close. And then Damani Richardson started the game, undrafted free agent safety from Texas A&M, started the game, and for the consecutive week has led the team in tackles. So rookies contributing throughout the game is huge to see. That's a win for Dan Morgan. We'll talk about another win for Dan Morgan today that came about this morning, but a lot of good to take away from. But like you mentioned, this was also a product of the Saints kind of giving the game away, so to speak.
Yeah, they gave it away, but it also stinks that going into the game, they get Chris Olave back. He's healthy, and he takes an unfortunate hit. It wasn't, I would say, necessarily dirty on Xavier Woods' part. I felt awful and miserable about putting a wide receiver in a situation like that. That's not what you want to do on the football field. And if you have those intentions, aka Vontae Burfict, you need to get suspended and removed from the league. But when you lose Chris Olave that early in the game, it put the Saints in a situation where they were kind of one-dimensional, and they were able to run the ball effectively, find some of their tight ends in the passing game. But outside of that, they struggled to really have a difference maker on the outside. And JC Horn and Mike Jackson benefited greatly from that. They allowed 0 receptions. They were the only 2 defenders with at least 25 defensive snaps to allow 0 receptions this past week. And that's impressive. That was something that you could really hang your hat on in terms of the secondary. And JC Horn has been able to stay healthy this year. So again, a lot of things that kind of build on from that department, especially when the matchup next week, this coming Sunday in Germany, features wide receivers like Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and an athletic tight end that's coming into his own in Theo Johnson, as we're talking about Jatavian Sanders. So it's those things to kind of key on and see if we can build on this, or if it was just simply a product of us playing backup wide receivers.
For sure. No better not reception or no reception allowed than the 4th and 4 to win the game by Mike Jackson, where 4th down and 4, they only need 4 yards, the Saints, and Derek Carr dials up a 25-ish, 30-yard downfield pass. Mike Jackson, perfect position, turns his head around, bats the ball away, wins the game for us. So that was cool there. Another good thing, the usage of motion. I know that was a complaint for both of us early in the year and like all of last year. Frank Reich was like afraid of motioning his players before the snap. But this week, we had motion on 73.6% of our plays, which I believe was 6th overall throughout the week, compared to 55% throughout the rest of the season for us. So it was a good, like, it's good to be able to move your players around, see what kind of defense you have, see what matchups you have. And I think Dave Canales is finally like coming into his own with that. That being said, there was a lot of stuff that Dave Canales, I think, did not do well in this game. To me, this was his worst play calling game by far throughout the season. And I think when we talk about the Saints giving away the game, I think on our end, we kind of tried to give away the game with a lot of the play calling stuff that went on. I thought we could have ended up scoring 30-ish or more, but we ended up winning 23-22, and a lot of it was because of Canales's failures play calling in this specific game. Like I said, I like his designs, like his route designs, kind of like Joe Brady. I liked Joe Brady's designs when he was here, but Canales's sequencing has suffered throughout this year. There was a series in the 4th quarter where this is when the Saints had gone up after they scored their 3rd touchdown. Second touchdown, excuse me. They had a bunch of field goals. We needed to score, and he dials up 3 straight screenplays. Obviously, we don't move the chains because it's 3 screens versus a sound defense. For all of Dennis Allen's faults, he knows how to get his guys in good positions. And obviously that didn't work. Bryce comes to the sidelines looking frustrated, and Canales is kind of smirking, cheering him up and stuff like that. Every 3rd down, this has been a problem all year, not just with Bryce at QB, not just with Andy Dalton at QB. On 3rd downs, especially on 3rd and shorts, Chuba Hubbard comes off of the field. When I think you could say he's our best player on offense, right? Or at least best skill player. When you take him off the field, and he's averaging 5 yards a clip, by the way. When you take him off the field, they know we're not running the ball. So when it's, we don't have to protect the run. You see Miles Sanders over there, he's just going to run over here and be the check down option. You don't really have to guard him. Just wait and see if he's the check down guy. When that kind of stuff happens, you lose like the element of multiplicity, I guess, by having different players on the field. If Chuba's out there, hey, maybe they hand it off. Maybe they run it. Maybe it's an option play on 3rd down, not on 4th down like 2 weeks ago. But it's the simple stuff like that. Jalen Coker being off the field on 3rd downs too. You can say what you want about Leggett. Coker, to me, is our most complete receiver. And when he's not on the field on 3rd downs, it's kind of an iffy thing. Mike Kay reported he did have a shoulder issue throughout the game, so that's why he was missing snaps. But even early in the game, they were taking him off the field on 3rd downs, which I don't understand. The delay of game on a 2-point conversion. How does that happen? Like, I don't know. Like, maybe you could chalk it up to Bryce. To me, being the head coach, you have to have everybody ready on such a crucial play. Obviously, we still end up winning the game, but that's still a rough one. And then in the locker room after the game, when he's given like the rah-rah speech, you know how coaches do after wins, and you love to see things like that. He mentions like every player who had an important play or a specific play throughout the game that turned the tide. Like he was like Charles Harris, Jadeveon Clowney each had half a sack in that last drive. Chuba had a touchdown. Chuba had a touchdown. Leggett had a touchdown. He mentions everybody except for Bryce Young. Now, that's just probably me nitpicking as a Bryce fan, but like it's little things like this. And then it's stuff like he's not committing to Bryce as the starter in pressers and stuff like that. combined with his, I don't want to say he's actively sabotaging the play calling, but it is unintentionally maybe sabotaging the offense. It's just not a good look whatsoever, especially coming off of a win. Imagine if we lost this game. He would be getting even more crucified than he already is on Twitter the past couple of days.
Yeah. Oh, the win has smoothed over a lot of that. His press conference following the game, and then even on Monday, we'll get into in a little bit. But in regards to just play calling, the play caller model that I've designed using a principal component analysis framework has Dave Canales heading into this week. He'll probably a couple spots, but he ranks 31st. He struggles to get offensive production, and some of that's just not having the right personnel on the field or dialing up the right play. Like you said, disguising the run and pass. You don't do that on third down when Miles Sanders is in the backfield. And to your point about Jalen Coker, what I will say is for an undrafted free agent, I don't know how quickly up the speed he is on the playbook. And if Canales is more comfortable with guys like David Moore and Jonathan Mingo, veterans who kind of understand the situational football a little bit better and understand maybe a change in play call and knowing where they need to be. And that helps with avoiding those delay of games. So do I want to see Jalen Coker more in those spots? Absolutely. I think from a wide receiver prototype, when you're looking at just an all-round guy, he's the best wide receiver on this roster, and I don't think it's close. Billy Marshall tweeted this earlier in the week. I think when you turn on the film, he is a really, really good route runner. And I've seen some interesting comps. One that's going around Panthers Twitter a lot is like a Jordy Nelson. But he's one of those guys where he's just a bigger possession wide receiver that has a little bit of finesse. And that's something that's missing on this team. So that's great to see. In regards to David Moore and Xavier Legette, who will kind of be the other guys rounding out the top three wide receivers on this team, you have Legette drop, or I wouldn't even say drop. He got robbed.
He got his chain snatched.
The reason why we go get a Legette is exactly the guy that we saw who scored the touchdown early on in the game. That guy that can box out, just grab the ball. He's a man among boys. And that wasn't the case there. Like you cannot let the ball get ripped out of your hands, especially a dime of a throw that was thrown there. And then to go to the David Moore drop, it is a hard thing to do to run at full speed and catch a ball downfield 40, 50 plus yards. But those are the kind of plays that are going to change a game. And that would have put 7 on the board.
That was a touchdown. Yeah,
it was. And so those are things that got to get cleaned up over the next couple of weeks. Those guys got to help Bryce out because the competition's only going to get tougher after the bye week. And that's just something to kind of keep in mind, that if those errors aren't fixed, they're going to get magnified a lot more. And these issues that we've had up until this Saints game are going to rear its head again.
Yeah, for sure. I like how you brought that up, that the competition's only going to get better. Each week we do our pick'ems. Like we have our little table here in the notes, and then you make the graphic that we post. I actually had picked the Panthers to win this one prior to Derek Carr being announced as the starter, because I was like, this, they're missing some corners. Rashid Shaheed's on IR. Spencer Rattler's really bad. So like there's a path to victory for our team. But then Derek Carr was healthy, and I'm like, maybe it might be a little too much. So I switched it to the Saints, but I had an inkling that we had an opportunity in this game. And clearly we took advantage of opportunities that they left on the field. But going forward, and we talked about this like 10 or I guess 15, 20 minutes ago before we started recording, we may not be in that position going forward unless we play like the Cowboys, who are dealing with a ton of injuries and dysfunction. Because like you look at the Giants, they're also 2-7, but they've been a lot more promising, I think, than the Panthers are. And there's no home field advantage in Munich. The what's the term? Like the fan base there is largely agnostic. It's like fans of all teams that show up to those games. So it's going to be a tough one. They have a tough D line as well. Then after the bye, you have the Chiefs, who just somehow continue to win. I actually watched the game last night. I was, let me say this, I was disgusted by Todd Bowles' decision not to go for 2 at the end of the game there. That's I'm a big go for 2 guy, like go for the win. And it's just, especially in rainy conditions and you're giving the ball back to Mahomes, it's just cowardice. And like, we're going to play those Chiefs who seem to keep winning. We're going to be in that game and be winning in the 4th. And then Mahomes is going to take the game away. Then we have, this isn't in order, but we have the Buccaneers twice, the Falcons again, the aforementioned Cowboys, the Eagles, who are really good right now, and the Cardinals, who are leading their division. So there is no easy path to victory as there was perhaps in this past game. So we really have to tighten up. Canales has to improve as a play caller. Some of those passes have to be reeled in by our receivers. And Bryce has to make some better downfield passes. He missed Coker on one. I think it was in the second quarter. There was one pass to Mingo. I think it was Mingo's only target where Alontae Taylor came in front and swatted it. I think if Taylor had gotten his head around quicker, he probably picks it. So Bryce has to improve there. But overall, I think there is stuff to build on with the offense. And I think the main takeaway with the game is it's nice to get a win, and it's nice to be able to eke out a win without guys like Thielen, Wanham, Brooks, all the guys who might come back this week or next week, or I guess in 2 weeks after the bye. That feels nice. But then we get to the post-game comments, right? And the Monday comments with Dave Canales, who, when Andy Dalton was the starter, he never hesitated, not even on Monday. Like after the game, he would never hesitate. And the verbiage he would use is, this is Andy's team. It wasn't like Andy's the starter for the Panthers. Like, this is Andy's team. But now that it's Bryce, it's been, we're going to watch the film, gather all the information, and make the best decision for the team. And he doesn't say gives us the best chance to win. That was his words with Andy. He's like, we're going to make the best decision for the team. And then, like you said, on the Monday presser, because they do one every Monday following the game, not Tuesday, because Tuesday is the off day, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. On the Monday presser, he wouldn't commit to naming a starter. For, like, I guess to credit him, because the trade deadline's today and maybe they are fielding calls on Bryce. Maybe he didn't want to show his hand there. I don't know. But this goes back to last week too. It's just being non-committal, especially when the last 2 weeks of Bryce Young have been better than every week of Andy Dalton since the Bengals game. That's my biggest gripe.
Yeah. I want to throw some advanced stats to kind of back up some of the points that you're making here. And that's going to start with kind of the last two starts for both quarterbacks. In the case for Andy Dalton, I think it was the Commanders. And who did we play before that? Was it the
Falcons.
Bears?
The
Falcons. Yeah. So yeah, at home, we lose both of those games. Bryce, obviously,
two bad defenses, or not bad, but like average to bad. The Falcons are bad.
Yeah. And so you take those two starts for Andy Dalton, and then you take the last two for Bryce Young, and their EPA per play, Andy Dalton's at negative 0.32. Bryce Young's at negative 0.05. So that huge discrepancy there. What I will say is, what I think when you look at what Dave Canales is saying with going back to the film, is that when you look at how frequently they're throwing to their first read, they're hitting screens and RPOs, these quick plays that are designed within the structure of the offense, you have a difference of, I think Andy Dalton's a little bit above 60% in kind of scheme usage, and Bryce Young's a little over 50%. That was obviously going into that Saints game. And then when you look at the difference in efficiency, it's almost, I think, a difference of like 0.32. So that, I think, when the coaches are turning on the film, they see a quarterback who's executing their system. And so therefore, he's going to be their guy until Bryce Young can figure out how to do that. What I'm going to say in regards to that, though, is you are the worst team in the league right now, or one of the worst in terms of talent. And you came into the building with the hopes of building Bryce Young up, fixing the offensive line, adding playmakers around Bryce, and that you could properly evaluate if he was a franchise guy. And you seem to close that door 2 games in, and 2 games since he got benched have looked decent. Like, this is where you can start figuring out, is this truly a guy that you can build an offense around, that you can maybe build a team around with and make a playoff push in a couple of years? Maybe, but we're not allowing that evaluation process to kind of take place because I think Canales is afraid of his job. He understands just how bad this performance has been up to this year. I mean, we only won by a point on Sunday. The point differential stuff that we talked about last week still stands. And if we have a couple bad losses after the bye, because after we play the Giants in Germany, after the bye, we play the Chiefs, the Bucks, the Eagles. There's a big chance that our average point differential in terms of a loss is like 20 points in all of those games. And like that puts you well over a negative 200 point differential with still several games left to go in the season. that is not something you can necessarily show like you're doing your job as a coach in terms of building a culture and a roster. And that's just, I think that's what it comes back to, is Canales is ultimately fearing for his job, and he thinks his best chance of winning is with Andy Dalton, even though he needs to evaluate Bryce Young.
Well, and you say that, right? But I think the last 2 weeks for each starter kind of disproves that. Even though you're talking about the first read, the scheme, all that, or like screens and all that stuff, that's the problem with the offense, especially in this Saints game. The screens were the problem. Bryce Young's best plays were when he got out of the pocket or when he would get to the second read. That's when a lot of the downfield stuff took place. That's like that set up the second touchdown, his run out of the pocket because he had to look past his first, second read, go, like that kind of stuff. We were moving the ball out of structure a lot of the time. And to me, that Canales has to improve, I guess, his own, like himself, the play calling. But if he's afraid of his job and he truly believes in his system, that might lend him thinking, oh, Andy Dalton can throw screens better than Bryce, so I need to do that. He can throw to the first read a little bit better. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that without Deontay Johnson, who was like Andy Dalton's best friend. But I can see what you're trying to say there. I just think for the greater good of the team, not just in terms of evaluating Bryce, but performance-wise the last 2 weeks, you have to play Bryce. And I think they will name him the starter just because they won the Saints game. It's like going to be really hard to go back to Andy from an optics standpoint following an emotional win like that at home. But
can we talk about the competitive advantage comment? Like, the Giants aren't worried if Andy Dalton or Bryce Young's dropping back the pass.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't change their game plan. Their defensive line is going to get after Bryce. I'm worried as Cade Mays is the center of him not being able to hold up against Dexter Lawrence, because there's going to be double teams there, and then maybe Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau are just going to come off the edge clean. Like I don't know how it's going to look. But
there was no gamesmanship with the we're trying to keep our cards close to the vest, because if you remember when they had to name Bryce the starter again, somebody asked him, is the offense going to be any different? He said, no, it's our system and both QBs can run it. So there is no difference in the QB in terms of the offense or the plays that are called according to Canales. But yeah, and then let's not forget, this will be my last point on the whole Canales versus Bryce, or Andy Dalton versus Bryce thing. The only reason Bryce started these last two games was because of a car accident, like a freakish event, not like a force of nature or anything, but like something out of the team's control, and it resulted in Andy Dalton spraining the thumb on his throwing hand. People hadn't talked about it a ton, but I had seen it reported once. Apparently, he was having trouble like gripping the ball the first week, or like the week following the car accident. And obviously you can't play him if he can't grip the ball, right? He was healthy this week, but that was a real thing. And that's what forced Bryce to be the starter again. I don't think Bryce plays at all before the bye if that doesn't happen. And then you don't have these conversations, but it's something where we are now. We didn't trade Bryce today. The trade deadline has come and gone for those who are listening. We're 4:30 right now. So he's here to stay. He has to be the starter throughout the rest of the year, in my opinion, especially when he has the rapport with the young players. Like, there is no more, we need to evaluate the offense, like the offense on the team. We know what it is now. Chuba's still running the ball 5 yards a carry. XL and Coker have more touchdowns with Bryce Young than they did with Andy Dalton. So it's like JT Sanders just had his best game of the year. You could say the Washington game was his best game, but that entire game was garbage time. So I'm not really going to count that one. So there's just really no reason to go back to Andy Dalton unless it's like your mindset. Hey, I'm afraid Tepper might fire me. I need to have the structurally sound guy in there whose EPA per play throughout the last 2 weeks is horrific. But I guess that's my closing remarks on that. What are your general thoughts with the whole thing? Because can we both assume that he's going to name Bryce the starter tomorrow?
I think Bryce Young is going to be named the starter. He won. There was a lot of good film in terms of where he put the ball on wide receivers and plays that just were left on the field. But when you make the comments like you did after the game, you don't praise Bryce Young for stepping in and leading a team to victory, even though he was voted a captain by the team. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the next press conference. And again, he has yet to sing Bryce Young's praises since preseason, like week
Yeah.
one, like he has said nothing good about this quarterback, which just makes you think the building, the front office, the coaching staff doesn't trust him. And that's just like, then why is he here? Then you should have shipped him out for a bag of chips if you don't believe in him. And like that's detrimental to his growth. Like, how do you think Bryce Young is handling that when he's hearing these comments? He knows what Dave Canales' stance is on it, to not have your own head coach believe in you. This is very reminiscent. And I'm not saying Dave Canales is Brian Flores in terms of tearing someone down, but the fact that you aren't building him up just shows like the difference between when Brian Flores left and Mike McDaniel got there and really built Tua up from a confidence standpoint, really believed in him and built a system around what Tua did best. Like that's what coaching needs to be nowadays, especially when you see what Kevin O'Connell has done with Sam Darnold and all the backups last year, what Matt LaFleur did with Malik Willis in several games this year. It goes to show you that a true offensive play caller and designer is really good at putting his quarterback in the best situation to succeed. So I want to see more of that. Now on to news, because we are running a little low on time. The Panthers today shipped out Jonathan Mingo for a 4th-round pick. And a lot of you are probably scratching your heads because you're like, Deontay Johnson is a far superior wide receiver. And we did a simple pick swap. And if anything, it was about 15 spots we moved up. So a lot of Panther fans probably are a little bit confused and worried about that, because it almost makes it seem and appear as if Jonathan Mingo is more valuable. And what it really comes down for, when you trade players in the NFL, what you're really trading for is that player's contract. And Deontay Johnson's contract expires at the end of this year. He's a free agent, and he's going to command probably a $20+ million extension or a signing somewhere else, depending on what happens in Baltimore. So when you look at it from that perspective, and then you look at Jonathan Mingo, who is still on his rookie contract, has 2.5 years to play out, he got traded for by a team that believed in Jonathan Mingo during last year's draft process and believes whatever they saw on film and during their scouting evaluation that they can get the most out of. And when you're seeing guys like Jahan Dotson, a former 1st-round pick, get traded for a 3rd-round pick this past offseason, and some of these other moves, it's just a team that is sending a late, either day 2 or early day 3 pick to kind of see if this guy still has anything left in the tank. And we'll see if that's the case. What we've seen from Jonathan Mingo up to this point just shows he's been one of the worst wide receivers from a production standpoint for those kind of wide receivers who've even garnished a target share in an offense. So it doesn't bode well for Jonathan Mingo in terms of future production. I'm sure playing with Dak is going to help a little bit, but this is a guy that clearly was a bust from last year that the team was willing to jettison at the trade deadline to kind of recoup some value.
It's nice to see Dan Morgan understands the sunk cost fallacy, right? Obviously, Jonathan Mingo wasn't working out. He got supplanted by Leggett early in the season. He got supplanted by Jalen Coker when we brought Coker up to the 53. This was a guy who I think over the last 4 weeks, so that's Bryce and Andy Dalton, had 1 catch on he had like 5 or 6 targets, but not a lot of production. And as far as the Deontay Johnson versus Mingo thing kind of goes, it is nice to have Jerry Jones on the line as opposed to it's not Ozzie DaCosta, right? Is there a GM?
It's Eric DaCosta.
Yeah, like obviously a difference in not only negotiating ability, but maybe like mental faculty at this point when in regards to Jerry Jones. So I'm a Cowboys hater, but today I'm a Cowboys fan. Thank you, Jerry Jones, for giving us a top 10 pick in the 4th round for Jonathan Mingo. And obviously, I've been a Mingo hater, but I want everybody to succeed. It didn't work out here. Maybe it'll work out there. They have a need for receiver as well, outside of CeeDee Lamb, who's currently a little banged up. They've had Brandon Cooks, who hasn't played the last couple of weeks. Jalen Tolbert, who I think he was the draft class before Mingo. He's shown a little bit, but not a lot. And then after that, Kavonte Turpin, I think, is the only receiver I know on the Cowboys. So they clearly had a need. They had, in that draft cycle, like you're talking about, the Cowboys had 4 top 30 visits for wide receivers. It was Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Josh Downs, and Mingo. So clearly their front office liked what they saw when he was at Ole Miss, and they're taking a chance. And I'm like you said, he's still a rookie on a rookie deal, not a 1st-round deal, so it's pretty cheap. And they still have him for 2.5 years. So that's like some of the positive Panther news today. I would say the other positive news, or I guess negative news for Panthers since that came out over the weekend. Dennis Allen got fired yesterday. I was hoping they would keep him and extend him, but I guess losing to the Panthers is like the cardinal sin in the NFL. Last year it was Arthur Smith. Like I think it was short. It wasn't directly after the Panthers lost, but it was throughout the end of the season where he got canned. And now it's Dennis Allen. They have the longest losing streak in the NFL now. I mentioned that last week. The Saints do. Their offense has struggled a ton. They have a ton of defensive injuries. And I think it's just funny that Derek Carr has gotten Dennis Allen fired twice. He got him fired on the Raiders back in 2014, and now yesterday in 2024. That's just crazy to me. You talked about the tough situation Chris Olave was in. When we were breaking down the game. Derek Carr is really the one responsible for that injury. We talk about if you look at hospital balls, like over the past, Peyton Manning's like the all-time hospital ball thrower. Derek Carr is right up there. I think about Amari Cooper, Marquise Goodwin on the Raiders, who got hit a ton, and now Chris Olave, Michael Thomas as well. Last year he got him hit. Derek Carr is a threat to your receivers on the team. So you saw a lot of people who are related to or fans of Olave on social media really chastising Derek Carr for his performance in that game. But that, I guess, is the big semi-Panthers related news. The Raiders also fired their offensive staff over the weekend after the Bengals blow them out. And I think it's important because when we did our preseason expectations episode, the first head coaches each of us had being fired, Dennis Allen for me, Antonio Pierce for you. And we got a little bit of that this past weekend. But you mentioned trades, and I think this is the big thing we need to do today because the trade deadline has come and gone. It was a busy deadline from the last 24 to like 36 hours. It kind of reminds me of like an NBA trade deadline where there's a ton of trades going on. The NFL is usually dry, but we talked about the Mingo one this morning. I was actually pulling up to the voting precinct, and I checked my phone. I fell to my knees. People were like, "Oh, are you okay?" And it's like, yes. We got a 4th round pick for Mingo, so that was a nice moment this morning. But yesterday, Denver trades Baron Browning, their outside linebacker, to the Cardinals for a 6th round pick. Why did they do that? Well, number one, they extended Jonathan Cooper, who's another edge rusher on their team, over the weekend. They gave him a 60/4. So they were confident in the guys they had on the team. And like, why not get an asset for one of the guys that might be outside of the rotation? Why did Arizona do it, though? You look at what they did to the Bears this past weekend. Caleb Williams was in hell, for lack of a better term. They were destroying the O-line. He was running for his life, made him miss receivers, all kinds of things. And Arizona was just able to like run the clock out throughout the game, basically. Adding a guy to that coming off of a performance like that, I think is important for Arizona, who is now 5-4 and leads their division. I know going back to that season predictions episode, I think you had the Cardinals second in the division. You were much higher on them than I was. Like, how do you view this kind of deal? I know Baron Browning isn't like Nick Bosa by any means or anything, but it's still a notable deal, I think, for them, especially this is a team that was dead last in pass rush win rate, just went up to 31st following that game. Maybe they can string together a couple wins with this boost on their defense now.
Yeah. I mean, from the Broncos, it makes a lot of sense. They've invested a lot into the offense and defensive line. You can only allocate so much cap space to your players, and they thought Cooper was their guy, and they still have to extend Zach Allen, who's been playing at a Pro Bowl, maybe even arguably an All-Pro level this year. And so they're set on that standpoint, and they were like, hey, let's get some resources from a guy that's probably going to hit free agency this year. And so it works out well for the Cardinals because, like you said, they've struggled to generate a pass rush. And right now, like you said, being 5-4, being in a situation where they are very much in contention for the NFC West title, they want to get better. And the defensive side was a side of the ball that we pointed to them needing to work on over the next couple of off seasons. And I think this is a step in that direction. I don't think he's a Montez Sweat edition like we saw the Bears get last off season. But this is not last offseason, but last kind of right before the trade deadline. I don't think he's that kind of caliber player, but he's one of those guys that he's going to definitely elevate that pass rush room. And that's huge. And kind of going in line with that, with a team that realizes they're in the hunt, you have a Super Bowl favorite in the Detroit Lions who go after Zadarius Smith, who's currently or was on the Cleveland Browns. But the Browns, after kind of being all in last offseason, getting Dalvin Tomlinson, trading for Zadarius Smith from the Vikings, that was a way for them to kind of offload some cap and kind of retool, because they know that they're in a rebuilding phase with Deshaun Watson kind of being inept. So with all that kind of in mind, I really do like the moves from the Cardinals and the Lions, trying to get better at pass rush positions when those are areas of weakness on their roster right now.
The Lions are particular, right? They had Aiden Hutchinson, who was the pressure leader at the time before he went down. I think it was the sack leader as well. Having to replace a guy like that isn't easy, but to get a guy who has had Pro Bowl caliber in the past, and I think has 5.5 sacks this year, if I'm not mistaken, getting him in there to help them is going to be huge, because their defense is obviously the weaker side of the ball, even though their defense is playing quite well. And like you said, this is a team that's in the hunt for the Super Bowl, 7-1 at this point, and now they can like add this kind of replacement. I think it's huge for them. In particular in that division, right? We just saw them play the Packers. It was I don't want to say it was like a barn burner, but it was interesting to say the least, because it was outside. Jared Goff doesn't thrive outside. It was in the rain, and it was in Lambeau. So it was like really adverse conditions, but the Lions were able to pull off the win. They were in the lead for like throughout the game. I got closer in the fourth quarter. Jaden Reed made a nice play down the field, but the Lions, I think, were firmly in control of that game. And to this point, I think are firmly in control of the division, because I believe it stacks up Lions, Vikings, Packers, Bears, and the Lions already have beaten both the Vikings and Packers. So getting a guy like this, Zadarius Smith, coming back to the NFC North, you have to remember he played for the Vikings 2 years ago, like you said, and for the Packers like 3 or 4 years ago. Coming back to the NFC North and helping them bolster that pass rush, it's going to be huge for them, because again, like you said, this is a team that's in the hunt. This is the team that I think will win the Super Bowl as it stands right now. So that's big for them too. We talked about the NFC North. I mentioned Chicago just briefly. They're sending Khalil Herbert, their a guy in their running back room who'd kind of fallen outside the rotation, to Cincinnati. Cincinnati needs more running back depth with the Zach Moss neck injury. We don't know when Zach Moss is going to come back, if at all, this season. Head neck stuff is really scary, so you never want to rush players back from that. But Khalil Herbert, we've seen him be like a guy who he can tote the rock if given the responsibility. It's just the Bears went out and signed DeAndre Swift at like 12:01 the first day of free agency. And they have Roschon Johnson, who is a really good like bruiser back. We talked about him last week with his ability to get touchdowns within 5 yards. This is a guy on the outside. I think this is a good move for Cincy, because it's for like a 6th or 7th. I don't remember what the compensation was, but a good move on the margins for a team in Cincy. Like that's another team that's going to be trying to fight for the division with a team like the Ravens and the Steelers. I think the Steelers are currently leading that division.
They have a long way to go. I think this is a step in the right direction, but a lot of the Bengals' issues are on the defensive side of the ball. And what I really liked was seeing teams like the Washington Commanders and even the Pittsburgh Steelers continuing to get better in areas where they're weak, or continuing to build on a strength. In the case of the Commanders, they understand that they haven't had necessarily the best pass defense. Their front seven has actually been really solid. They've gotten a lot of production out of a lot of solid veterans and a lot of core pieces that they've retained over the past couple seasons. But going out and getting Marshawn Lattimore to really be their cornerback one from the Saints, who are also in a situation where they're pretty much sellers at the trade deadline, similar to the Browns. You had higher expectations going into the season, and they've completely plummeted. So I like this from the Commanders. In terms of the Steelers, they actually added area of weakness at the wide receiver position, going out and getting Mike Williams from the Jets, and then also getting Preston Smith from the Packers to bolster a defensive line that already features TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton. I think I'm missing somebody else. It's just like that deep. And it's just like you add another guy that is going to be a great rotational player. I think the Steelers also know that they have kind of this window of opportunity where they not only want to make the playoffs, they want to win a game or two. They want to show that they're for real and that what they're building currently in Pittsburgh is going to be sustainable. So I like those moves. And then the Baltimore Ravens, I think they're always really good about understanding that, hey, we have a weakness, let's fix it. So you see guys like Rashad Bateman drop passes and I kind of not help the offense necessarily. And that's been an issue. You go out and trade for a guy like Deontay Johnson to bolster that wide receiver room, add some competition. And then this past week, Actually, today you go out and you trade for Trey White from the Rams. You add some cornerback depth, and their pass defense, their defense in general, hasn't been as good. So adding a veteran presence like that hopefully kind of bolsters that unit and helps them become the Super Bowl contender that they're kind of projecting to be. And that's really more led by Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry on the offensive side. But any bit of juice that you can get on both sides to make yourself that much better, especially when you have to go up against the Chiefs, who look really good right now with DeAndre Hopkins. So I think that really wraps it up, unless you want to talk about some of these kind of deals.
Yeah, I did want to talk about number one, the Washington one. That's probably the big one of the day, right? Getting a starting corner. He might not be at the Pro Bowl level he was a couple of seasons ago, but they needed a corner, right? It was Benjamin St. Juste who we had talked about like in the preview for that game with us. Hey, whoever's on St. Juste, throw it to them. Obviously, Andy Dalton didn't do that. And Emmanuel Forbes, a guy on the outside looking in, they finally get a good starter there that I think can help that pass defense, which is I think that's the true weakness of that team. And then the Steelers, like you talked about, helped both ends. And the Ravens, I think the Ravens one is interesting. Even both Ravens trades, Deontay Johnson and Trey White, because with the Steelers, those are the two teams right now competing for that division. And each of them added a wide receiver and added a veteran on defense to try to help them. With the Steelers, I think it's interesting because with Russ still as the starter, you know what he likes to do. Downfield, sideline shots. That's like the Mike Williams specialty when he's healthy, going back to the Chargers. So I really like that one. And then the Trey White one I like a lot too. We saw them drop about 17 interceptions that Jameis threw 2 weeks ago. So getting any veteran cornerback there is going to help. But I I think all of these trades were beneficial for both teams. Even the Mingo one, like they needed a receiver. I think obviously we won compensation wise, but I liked all the trades that went down today and going back to a couple weeks ago. I do wish we would have gotten more for Deontay Johnson, but it's been an eventful trade deadline to say the least. And that's going to bring us into Purrfect Takes. And you had talked about, because we're doing two different podcasts each week now, our takes are going to be a bit more structured on Tuesdays versus Thursdays. So what's today's Tuesday one going to be based around?
It's going to be more, because this is a reaction episode, things that we learn from Sunday, vibes that we're getting, and they can be more future long predictions. They can be more just about a specific team or player, but it's just an overarching like idea or concept, where I think on Thursdays when we do Purrfect Takes, after kind of doing some homework, seeing how the matchups are playing out, seeing who's injured going into that slate of games that week, that's where I think we can do our takes a little bit more specific to where they can be almost applied to a bet. And so we'll kind of transition that to like a Purrfect Takes, Perfect Bets. Obviously, this is not betting advice. If you want to trail us, if you want to fade us, do whatever you want to. But that's kind of the idea. So with that in mind, my perfect take for this week is that I think the Washington Commanders and Jaden Daniels will win the NFC East. And it's really going to come down to them and the Eagles. But going up 7-2, going out and trading for a Marshawn Lattimore, having the offensive rookie of the year. I mean, it's crazy. Jaden Daniels has negative odds when you look at just his prediction to win that award. And I mean, what he's doing, he's more in the MVP race, in my opinion, than just the offensive player of the year. So that's definitely a huge boost for him. But that's my take. I think the Commanders, Dan Quinn, Jaden Daniels, Cliff Kingsbury, all the pieces that they've added through this offseason till now is going to put them in a position where they win the NFC East.
Yeah, it was like the Victor Wembanyama odds toward the end of the season last year for Rookie of the Year. It was like negative $1 million or something. Like they were making sure you weren't making money. Yeah, and to Jaden Daniels' credit, we knew about Wembanyama when he was like 15 in France, and like he was dominating the Team USA players. Like he was heralded as this guy. Daniels wasn't. Caleb Williams was heralded as the guy, but Daniels has been the one to do more with his team. So I like that one. And I think it speaks to looking at today, the Eagles didn't go out and get a guy to help their team. And they have some clear weaknesses, receiver depth on the back end. I like their corners. I like their line or their front, but I think the linebackers still need help there. My perfect take this week is looking back at what the Panthers were able to accomplish for the other team, getting Dennis Allen fired, getting Arthur Smith fired last year. I think the Panthers are going to get another coach fired this year. And it's going to tie into a take that I had a couple weeks ago now. But we end up playing the Cowboys on week 15. And I think we're going to be the straw that breaks Jerry Jones's back in regards to Mike McCarthy. But I'll just say we will get another head coach fired by beating a team this season.
I like that take. What I will be interested to see is if Jonathan Mingo catches his first touchdown pass against us, and he would return back to Charlotte. I think we're hosting Dallas that week here in Charlotte. So that'll be really cool. But as of this episode, we are wrapped up. If you have any questions or comments for the preview episode on Thursday, shoot them to us at Purrfect_Takes. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your content. We'll be there, and we'll catch you guys later this week.